a focus on using the modular in a production context. So let's see here if we are live. Cool. Yeah, looks like we are. So cool. Welcome, everybody. This is a new setup. As I mentioned, I started building out a little bit ago a production modular case, and we'll talk a little bit about why and how that's different from my live performance modular case and some of the other stuff. Also, I'll still be using, of course, electron boxes and other stuff, but there's going to be a renewed focus on the modular and using it in the production as well as kind of focusing a little bit more on that for the live stuff. And so let's see here. Oh, a few people popping into the chat. Welcome, Saggy Dogs. Cool. Welcome. Glad to have you here. So I'm going to actually pop things around just a little bit so you can see what we're dealing with. So this is the new setup, or at least one corner of the room. If you have watched a bit the other live streams, you would have seen this empty case in the background for the last couple live streams, because I was just starting to get things built out, and that's where this is living right now. Obviously, you can kind of see next to me there's some other gear that's in the racks right next to us, and still a couple of the electron boxes, having them right here close at hand. Love having the Digitact here, specifically the Digitact 2 for percussion stuff. So that's where this setup has come from. So what the plan was for today, I was just going to be in the studio anyway, messing around with the stuff. I just fired this up for the first time yesterday and was messing around with some things. I'll first play a little bit the patch that I was doing yesterday, and then I'm going to unpatch everything, and we're going to do a patch from scratch and just kind of start going through my thought process on making sounds and using those sounds for production, making sounds in the modular and using those sounds for production. We'll talk a little bit about how the case is laid out and why. And if you have any questions about any of this stuff, we're talking about, or anything in general is fine, go ahead and post those up in the chat, and I will try and keep an eye on the chat, which is on the screen over there. That's why I keep looking over that way. I'll keep an eye on the chat, and you guys just let me know if you've got other stuff. So I'm just gonna start this a little bit, and you can let me know if they're what the levels are like. So this is kind of the level that we're looking at here. So let me know how this is sounding on there. All right, we'll stop that just for a sec. And yeah, just pop in there, and sounds like you think I've got issue with my mic. It's one of these lav mics that's under my shirt, so you're probably hearing some rustling and ruffling from that, so should be all right. But how's the sound as far as the music goes? Let me know what you hear there, and if I need to lower down the mic at all, I can go ahead and do that as well. So yeah, so this patch that we have going right here, let's see, cool, sounds good. I'm assuming this is from Mexico. Sweet. Yeah, so basically this patch, what we've got going right here is the kick drum that you heard is coming from the shock mount battering ram only by itself, and that is going down here and going straight into the mixer. There's no processing on it, there is no nothing. That is that kick. So there's my dog barking in the background. So that kick is just the shock of my battering ram. We can talk a little bit more about this kick, my favorite kick I've ever heard, and we can talk a little bit more about what it's doing. But yeah, so we'll just jam this out for a little bit, and then we'll chat a little bit afterwards. If you have questions, go ahead and pop them into the chat, and then we'll go from there. All right. So that's what I was working on last night, and that I wanted to kind of jam out just a little bit today, and have you guys check it out. Let me know what you think. Let me know if there's anything that you'd like to hear or ask questions about or discuss or whatever. So yeah, that was this first initial patch. So I've been putting this case together for a little while now, and just patched it up for the first time yesterday and started messing around with stuff. This was kind of like the fourth or fifth random patch that I came up with, and was just trying to play with the different things that were here and look at the different possibilities of having a larger setup rather than just the setup from my live performance rig. So that's basically what this was. The kind of the reasoning behind this, and one of the main reasons why I wanted to set up this rig was the live performance rig that I have was really designed for maximizing my possibilities for improvisation in a really small space. I have a limit of 6U84 so that it will fit in my carry-on case for luggage, and so I wanted to make sure that I could fit everything in there. So there's a lot of voices in there that are kind of all-in-one voices that may include filters or envelopes or things like that, rather than having those spread out across the case, so that way I could be a bit more efficient with my use of space. I also have, the filters that are in there. If the modules don't have a filter and I'm using an outboard filter, most of those are 4 HP, so they're really small filters so that they'll fit into a smaller space, which limited me. And there was a lot of fantastic hardware that I couldn't use because I just didn't have the space for it, and I didn't want to expand into a much larger case for performing live. So wanted to keep it kind of reined in for a smaller size. So now that I have this built for my home setup, the idea was to be able to kind of stretch out a little bit and spread my wings a little bit and put some things in here that I wasn't able to fit in the other one. So I've got a lot more things like outboard envelopes, larger size filters, outboard VCAs, and things like that that I wasn't able to put in there. I also working a bunch of trades for gear that I have right now for a bunch of other modules that are going to go in here. So again, bigger modules that weren't necessarily that I'm not able to fit into the smaller case. So I have a couple of oscillators that are much bigger, the DPO and the Chaos Odessa that I'm going to be getting. So those should be getting those tomorrow, and yeah, those will be take up a bit more space in the case and wouldn't fit as well into the smaller case. So the idea being that this case is really for sound design and exploration and coming up with things that I will either use in production, so record into my DAW. So this is all running through Ableton. That's actually what you're hearing this through, running into the live stream. And so that way I can track things in as I want to use them. And if I don't want to go into Ableton, I can also sample into the Digitakt 2, and then I can have samples that I can take with me when I go to perform live, and those would live inside this box, which would be great. That'll help me save that space. So I can still use the modular performance case for the things that I can do there. But if there's things that I want, for example, from the DPO or the Odessa that I want to take with me for a live performance, I can make some of those into samples that I can take and then use in the live shows. So yeah, so let's check out the chat and see what's going on. James the Lemonade Maker, what a great name. The Modular 100, yes. Sounds really good. Awesome. I'm glad you like it. Glad it sounds good. I want you to show us that kick. Okay, I'm happy to show you the kick. Let's see. And more nice sounds. Love your emotion when you talk about it. Cool. Well, I'm glad. I'm glad that comes through, that I'm excited and enjoy what I do and all that stuff. Liking that last perk sound, sort of the bottle tink sound. That was, let's see, I think, if I'm not wrong, was it this sound? So if it was this one, yes, that's from the Modular. That is actually coming from, what is that from? Oh yeah, that's coming from the Bastille Pizza, which again, it's in my, I use that in my live performance case as well. And I use it for all my bass lines because it's a really fantastic sounding bass module and it's a really small one. But one of the cool things with the Pizza is that you can set the top tuning knob to basically just jump octave. So that's still that same line coming from the Pizza, or I can bring it up and have it be something higher. So again, it's pretty cool that a module like that is super flexible, and that's one of the reasons why I have it in my performance case. But also here, one thing I wanted to do with all those modules that I have moved over here from my performance case for right now is I want to use them differently from how I used them there. So I usually use the Pizza for my bass lines, so I didn't want to use that for bass lines here. I usually use the BIA for more kind of gritty, either bassline sounds or lead sounds. And here I was using that for this hat sound. That's so yeah, it's trying to use them for different in different ways than before. So let's see here. Yep, that was the one. So yeah, it's the Bastille Pizza. That's coming from there. DPO is great. Yes, I love it and have always wanted one, but was never able to fit it into my performance case. And my performance case was really my only case. Everything that wasn't in it was just kind of sitting on a shelf or in other random cases that I had around here that I wasn't really using. They were really used more for storage. And at first the idea started with this, that I wanted to have something to use as kind of a library to pull from for my performance case. And then I was like, no, I really want to turn this into a production center and sound design center. So that's what that is for. Let's see. Are you sequencing from the Metron or the Oxi? So both. I actually didn't hook up the Oxi until after I had done this patch, because when I first started doing this patch, I wasn't really planning on making music, but I kind of got sucked into it. I was just messing around with sounds and seeing what worked with what and trying out a couple new modules that I had. And then I started kind of getting into it, and I had the Metron in the case already. So I was sequencing from that. And so I haven't started sequencing with the Oxi yet, but I do have the Oxi here. And the reason it's running right now and the reason that I have it going here is because for me, it's one of the easiest ways to sync MIDI with CV is through this. So I'm actually doing clock out from the Oxi into the Pam's workout and then using that to clock other things. And then I'm using the MIDI out from the Oxi through the Oxi split right over here. One is going into the Oxi Choral for sequencing, which I haven't started using yet. And the other one is going into the Digitac to give it start, stop, and tempo. So I'm using it for that right now, but the plan is to use it mostly for that. I like the Metron for certain types of sequencing. I like it for, it's kind of like if you're familiar with my live rig, I use both the Oxi sequencer and the Electron sequencers. So for example, in the Digitac, normally the tracks 1 through 8, I'm sequencing the drums from within the Digitac 2. And because I like to be able to parameter lock different things and sound and all of that kind of stuff. Then 9 through 16 are more, melodic stuff for stabs or bass lines or things like that. And I'm sequencing those from the Oxi One because it can generate random pitch in key, which the Electrons can't do. So when I come back into the modular case, I have kind of a similar workflow. If something's going to be percussion or like kind of atonal, I'll probably sequence it from the Metron. I have the Volterras and you can do those to key, but it's still pretty random. I mean, you don't have a ton of control over what you're doing and what you're sequencing with the Volterras. and it's much easier on the Oxi One. So really the idea is to do anything that's melodic will still be sequenced from the Oxi One, just for ease of use. Another thing that's kind of cool about that too is if I'm sequencing patterns in the Oxi One and I like something and I want to use that live, I don't necessarily have to sample what I've done here. I can just save that pattern and then I could play that live and just redirect that pattern to another instrument. It could go to, you know, the D-tack, you could go to the Synth, you could go to the Modular, it could go kind of anywhere. So I'll still be using that kind of dual sequencer workflow. Let's see, been using the Battering Ram for kick and it's quite nasty. Yes, speaking of pizza, have you tried swapping firmware with the new crust kick version? I haven't. I listened to and played with that new module, the crust module at Superbooth, and it was cool, but not cool enough that I wanted to swap firmware. I love the pizza firmware. I love it as a bass module, and you know, bass and lead, and I think as FM synths go, it's very very flexible, and it's also very easy to dial in really cool sounds on it. So I just didn't want to swap it out because of that. And the other one sounded okay, but definitely not a good enough kick that I was going to swap it with the Battering Ram. So that said, you did ask about the kick module, so we will talk about this a little bit. So this is the Shockmot Battering Ram. I don't know if you can see how well you can see that in the video, but so basically there's really only a very few knobs on it. So you've got 4 larger knobs and then 1 smaller knob that's in here. And this is for drive, decay. The 4 large knobs from top to bottom are drive, decay, click, and tuning. And then the smaller knob is kind of a depth knob for the depth of your initial hit, your initial envelope. So if I was to bring these all down to be the most super mellow as possible, and then start, actually, make sure I reset here. Yeah, so then I'm actually have a little bit of delay on here, which I'm going to take out. Just one sec. Yeah. So there we go. So yeah, so that's basically kind of like everything turned down. So you know, the bare minimum. And one thing that I love about this Battering Ram module is that it's just nothing but sweet spots. So if you listen to this, even with everything down, it still has power. It still has thump to it. And it still has, you know, it's still a sound that you could use, which I think is amazing. So if we bring up the drive just a little bit, that's the drive. So there's 2 different drive circuits. There's the green one and the red one, and they kind of overlap. The top 25% of the first drive is the same as the bottom 25% of the second drive. So with this one, you can get it all the way up to, that's the top end of this drive circuit. And if I bring this all the way down and switch them over, that's the bottom end of the other one. And this one goes. So it comes way up. I have just been using the green one. It's more my style of kicks. So we'll put that at 12 o'clock for now, just to kind of start off with something a little bit more mellow. Then we can bring up the decay. And again, that's at 12 o'clock. We can bring up the depth a little. And so that's still not tuned at all. So that's still on its deepest, lowest note, and that's with no click. And the click is the transient. So if you think about this in context, so actually I'll put this in context. So depending on what you're listening to this on, if you're listening on good speakers or on headphones, you'll still get to hear a bunch of the power of that kick, even though there's not really a transient. And if you really want this to kind of shine through and kind of pop out of the mix, that's when you kind of start to look at that transient. So I'll add that in just a bit. And raise the depth a little. So you see how you get a real kind of thump from that one. I'll take this back out. So that's the transient coming back down to 0, and then 12 o'clock, and then at about 3 o'clock. And then you've got the tuning, obviously, so you can tune this to your desire. Okay. So where I've been using this a lot, kind of the settings that I like are everything between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock. I like how that sounds. So I'll bring up the drive first. So that's 3 o'clock, that's 2 o'clock. So right in there without overdoing it. And then I like a bit more decay as well, and especially if I'm not going to be using a rumble. And with this, I found that I haven't been needing to, which is really great because the decay on this is great. So I'll turn this up. So that's about 2 o'clock. So that's pretty much everything at about 2 o'clock. And the depth, you'll be able to hear the depth a bit more if I bring this up now too. So that's depth all the way down, 12 o'clock, and all the way up. And I like this one at about, I don't know, 1 o'clock or so. So this kick, it has so much power that it is, the thing that I found that's really great with it is that you don't have to do anything else with it. You don't have to process it. You don't have to, I mean, that has no compression, that has no processing. There's nothing on that at all, even going through Ableton. So I don't have anything at all. So it's really just the sound of that kick module. Really one of my top 2 favorite modules that I saw at Superbooth, and there were literally hundreds, if not thousands of modules there. And I've never heard a kick that sounded like this before. I heard it in their booth. I had heard a couple demonstrations of it online and it sounded interesting, but I wanted to hear it in person and see really if it had that same sound that I had heard in some of the demos. And it was even better in person. And then after Superbooth, I played a show with it in Brussels, and then I played a show with it in Seattle. The Seattle show was on a Function One system, and it was thunderous on that system. So I can tell you firsthand, it sounds great here, like in headphones, but it also sounds absolutely fantastic in a live setting with the big sound system and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's quite the module. So again, we can just mess around with it again just a little bit. So again, these are the settings that I like on it. So if I put these more in context, you'll hear why. And again, this is no processing. This is no, it's no processing, it's no compression, there's no sidechain, there's no nothing. This is just these instruments kind of holding their place in the mix on their own. So yeah, so anyway, that's the Shakmat Battering Ram. Absolutely phenomenal kick module, and I will be using this for everything. It definitely will be living in my performance case. I stopped using the kicks that I had in the Digitakt 2. They were actually kicks that I had made on the Analog Rhythm and were some of my favorite kicks ever. And I completely replaced those with this module because it just sounds that much better. It's pretty amazing. So yeah, it will live in my case forever. I think I'm gonna hopefully at some point get a second one so I can just leave this one in my production case and have one for my performance case. I'm also really looking forward to sampling drums off of this, and I'm going to be putting together a sample pack of kicks from this module. I think I might do drums in general, and so I'll do kicks from this and percussion and hats and stuff from the Percons, I think, so that way we could have a full drum sample pack. So I'll be doing that pretty soon. I do have a Percons sample pack on my web store, so if you go to circlelive.com/shop, you can go and pick that up there. And that's all from the Percons. That's everything that's in that is from the Percons. So let's see here. If you sequence the Digitakt from the Oxi, you could use the electron bug that they have left alone. Is it actually useful as a scene? Yeah, the one where you can put trigless trigs in here, and then you can hold them down and you can use those as kind of a ghetto version of a scene. Yes, I actually did a video on that a couple months ago with the Digitakt 1. It's actually not a bug in the Digitakt 2. It's something that's been part of their software for a long time, and you could use the Digitakt 1 as well to do that same thing, which is pretty cool. Let's see here. Ooh, love these. Yeah, thanks. I love doing these. Love hanging out with you guys. I would be here anyway. I would be here making music, hanging out, doing this stuff anyway. So it's always more fun when there's people to chat with. And so if you have questions or anything that you'd like to see or talk about or anything like that, please feel free to put it in the chat. Let's see. Didn't know the show in Seattle had the Battering Ram. Yes. It did, and it's pretty funny. I mean, like when we were doing sound check and I very first put that on and kind of came out front to listen, I had people coming up to me asking me what the kick was, and it was that noticeable. I had heard the kick as well without even knowing that I was hearing it. When I was in Berlin for Superbooth, we went to Berghain for an event that had Dasha Rush and Colin Bender's and a few other things. And we were talking about how amazing Colin Bender's kicks sounded in there, you know, and he was playing all modular as well. And then I came to find out the next day that he was using the Battering Ram as well, and that's become kind of his go-to one kick drum. And he's infamous for doing kicks that use like 15 modules to do different types of envelopes and different kinds of whatever, and to come up with a kick sound. And he's kind of foregone all of that just for this module. So I think that says a lot as well, because few people in the world are as adept at modular as Colin Bender. So having that bit of support from him is pretty amazing as well. And a bunch of other performers that I know have started picking this up. I know that that Sarah Summers is using it now. I know that a bunch of others. So it's I think you're going to hear a lot more about it. I think it's going to become kind of the techno standard or the modular standard for drum kick modules, just because it's amazing. And it was a collaboration between Shockmount Modular and Mark Nostromo, who, if you don't know who he is, he works for Ableton. And like he was the person who designed the drum bus in Ableton, so if you're familiar with that. And this was a coding project of his that he did on the side, and Ableton didn't want to put it into their stuff, so they kind of made it a collaboration with Shockmount, and it's pretty amazing. I think they did a really amazing job. Let's see here. Mythical kick. Yes, it is. Just got an Oxi here, so you can see there's a lot to learn. Yes, there is. Is it easy enough to send envelopes? To be honest, I don't know. As much as I use the Oxi, I never use it to send envelopes. So I know it can. I just don't use it for that. It's funny, kind of with every piece of gear that I have, I'm not one of those people that I try to squeeze everything out of it. I want it to do the things that it's the best at and not try to make it do everything all at once. I think that's when you run into problems and end up kind of cluttering up your workflow and things like that. So I use, there's only a couple of the different types of sequencers on here that I use. I don't use all of them. I don't use a lot of the modulation stuff, which you can use, but it's not something that I've been using. And who knows, maybe with this case, I'll start to use it a bit more. But yeah, it's an amazing machine, amazingly deep machine, and it just keeps getting deeper and deeper. Manuel from Oxi is fantastic, and he's super responsive. He's done, I don't know how many hundreds of updates since he came out with it, and he's constantly come out with new features and things. And sometimes they're big features, like he'll add a new type of sequencer, or he'll add, the ability, right now there's the ability to do MIDI looping by track. So you could have, this can have a total of 32 tracks that you're sequencing on, and you can actually MIDI loop at different lengths, every one of them, and move them around and move the loops and stuff. He just added that feature just recently, just to, randomly to an update. And then sometimes the updates that he does are just like quality of life updates. So I don't know if you can see this. If I tip this up, you might be able to. But these buttons over here on the black one, actually on all of them. So on the normal one, which I can show you my other Oxi One. This was my original Oxi One before I got the black one. On this one, you had white buttons with black writing on them. So it was a lot easier to see in a dark nightclub if you needed to see what was on the buttons. The new sequencer, this one had black buttons, and the writing, you couldn't read it in the dark. It was really hard, so you had to kind of know what you were doing. And so he was just able to add backlighting to those, which it never really had before. And again, that's one of those things where a bunch of us asked for it, and then all of a sudden it could do it. I know that from talking with Travarsi, she was using this as well, and she had some things that she wanted it to do, like being able to carry over preset or preferences from one pattern to the next, being able to do immediate launching or muting and unmuting of things rather than waiting till the beginning of the pattern to unmute or mute, since they're MIDI mutes. And Manuel was able to put those things in. So now you have the ability in the settings to decide how you want to set it up. And all of that was just really responsiveness from the people who were the users of the gear. Yeah, so let's take a look here. The Pico Drum 2 makes some crazy sounds for a 3-piece module. I've actually never played with that before, but it's yeah. If it's a good sound for you, it's a good sound. That's all that matters. Any idea why the kick is that special? I don't know. I mean, for me, I'm a pretty simple guy. It's that special because it sounds awesome. And there's two things, like I had never really used much modular or many modular kick drums in the past because I never found ones that I liked. They were all kind of mushy or, overly distorted, or didn't have the kind of punch that I liked, or, they needed a whole bunch of processing after the fact in order to sound good. And so this, just doesn't need any of that stuff, which is pretty amazing. And it's really well thought out, the way the amount of throw that the knobs have, as far as how much information you get, or how much change there is in the information as you turn the knob. It was really well thought out. They could have put that full range of drive in one circle of the knob, like one turn of the knob. But the problem is then you would have like these tiny little bits of movement that would make really huge differences. So the way they did it was really smart, where they divided it up into two, and they made it so that you could have a lot more fine control of things without having to be super detailed. So that's really cool. There's a couple of other things that it does that make it really interesting that I'm not doing at the moment, but I will definitely be messing around with. One of those is it has an output for envelope. And if you press the button on it, you can actually invert the envelope that it's sending out. So it's the envelope that you're using for the kick itself, but you can send out an inverted version of that, and you can split that with a multiple to multiple other modules. And so you're in effect pushing out sidechain to other things if you run that to the VCA that those are going through. So you can duck with that envelope this at the same time that you're spiking with the envelope in the unit itself. And so it does in effect exactly the same thing that a sidechain does. And a lot of times we're doing these kind of fake sidechains by sequencing them, which only works if you're using like a 4 on the floor kick. But if you decide to change up your kick and do something more of a breakbeat style kick, you're not going to get that same sidechain. So if you're sidechaining your bass, it's still going to duck on the downbeat, even though the drum hit may not be on the downbeat. So you're going to end up with those clashing sounds. With this, you could send out that inverted envelope to your bass, and you could duck it out of the way for, for any hit that the drum has, no matter how you sequence it, or if you change up the sequence in your performance or whatever. And so really well thought out. So, and besides that, why does it sound great? I really think that it is when I first was messing around with this at their booth, at Super Booth, the thing that really struck me was that there weren't any unusable or weak or bad sounding positions for any of the knobs. So no matter where you moved the knobs, in any combination, everything was usable. So it was like the whole thing was just full of sweet spots. Just, everywhere you turned, there was something usable. Now, I'm finding certain bits that I like, for kind of my sound, my standard sound kick that I'll use. But at the same time, there's a lot of times in a performance where I would want to soften up my kick and not have it be quite so hard. And so what I was doing when I was using sampled kicks is I was just adding some attack to the envelope to kind of take that transient off, to make it soften things up just a little bit, or filtering things down at the same time. With this, I don't need to do that. I can just take out things. I can take out the click, and I can back off the drive a little bit, and that gets me that same thing. So it keeps it very immediate. I don't have to go into a whole other section and change up what I'm doing. I can just modify this. This also has the ability to save states. So you can save basically like a preset of wherever you are. And so it makes it, again, highly usable for in a lot of different scenarios. So yeah, any other questions about this patch or this rig or this setup? Because if not, I want to start to go into, I'm going to take things apart and kind of get started over again so that we can walk through a bit of this. So yeah, so I will let's just start unpatching, which is always the most fun part. So I'm just gonna take these and hang these over here. Yeah, I've got, a couple things that I will leave patched up. I'll leave the kick drum because, obviously I'm still gonna use that, and I'm gonna leave my clocks patched up. But other than that, I will unpatch everything else. Put these all down here, and we can start to do stuff from scratch, which is tons of fun. Just to talk while I'm doing this about a couple of the different modules that I got specifically for doing this, for this this type of sound design, is I got a couple of modulation sources that I hadn't been using much before. So like some separate envelopes, like the 10 grams and things like that. I also got some offsets, like the WMD 410 and the Sync Defro from Noise Engineering, so that I could have a little bit more control over individual things. But yeah, so almost there. I'm gonna keep that one too. So that's a clock source that's coming from there. These are both modulation, which I don't need anymore. We'll be setting those back up on their own. Yeah, so basically now we are, oh yeah, so I want this one as well. This is the send from the mixer going to the Ghost and the return. So I'll just leave that. So there's certain things that I would leave patched, and that's kind of like where we are right now. So this is the kick. So we've got trigger in, and then we've got sound coming out into the mixer. So I'll just leave that one. This is the MIDI coming from the Oxi One into the Oxi Coral. And then this is a clock going from the PAMs to the Quadrant and Swarm. This is a clock that's going to, where's this clock going to? I don't remember. Oh, this is the clock coming from the Oxi One to the PAMs. And then we've got a couple of other clocks, one that's coming over here to clock the Metron. This one is clocking the Ghost. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So everything else is pulled. The only other thing is my main outs that are coming out of the WMD performance mixer, and those are going into an audio interface over here on the side that's then taking this into to Ableton. So one of the modules that I got that was new, that I hadn't had before, was the steady state gate, which is a low pass gate, which I hadn't really messed with much, but I'd really been wanting to. So let's put, can't see this really well, but so we're going to start to repatch now. So we're just going to do for a bass voice, we're going to go into the Ericsson's bass line, but I'm not going to use any of the functions from that. I'm going to use outside sources or outside envelopes and things like that. So this is going to go into the steady state gate, and then we'll go from that output into the mixer. It's kind of growling at us. Okay, so that's just that oscillator. If I tune it up. It has a detune on it, so that's why you're hearing that detune sound. If I take that away, you're just gonna get straight oscillator. And this is with the detune, which I love on this one. So it's like having multiple oscillators detune, which is pretty cool. So then we are going to go from, and actually that's coming out of there. We want this to come out of here. So now we're going to take the trigger from that and go into our gate input in the 10 grams. And then we're going to go from, that's not long enough. We'll go from that output into the VCA, which is, so the WMD performance mixer has VCAs built in by channel, so you don't need outside VCAs. You can use them if you want, but it's kind of handy that there's one for each and you've got a patch point for each, so you can just patch that VCA into the level of this, and yeah. So then if we kind of get things started, do a reset here. So if we get things started, I can clear out this pattern that was in here before, and we'll just kind of lay down a few random triggers and see what that gets us. And we want this to be a little bit more bassy, so tune that down just a little bit. And where those, where the pitches are coming from, the pitch CV is coming from the Volterras. So if you haven't used this before, you just can hit record, and this Volterra will be going out to the volt per octave. And when record's on, I can just turn this. So this is going through the steady state gate, and that is closed down right now. I'll take out some of the decay and the timbre. Reduce down the Q as well. And I love the kind of character that this adds. And that's just without any Q. If I start to move the Q up, it gets that nice buzz. And then if you add timbre and decay, and again, if you wanted this to be more of a lead sound, you can just boost up the pitch on that one. You can bring in a kick. So a lot of times I like to have just like a random kick that I can kind of use just as a timekeeper while I'm messing around with stuff. So what I'll do a lot of times is I'll take off the transient and I'll back off the drive, so I'll get something more like this. So it's really just a timekeeper in the background. You know, and something else that's pretty cool with this setup as well is that if I want to sequence the pitch from the Oxi instead, I can just pop this out and pop it into the Oxi and go ahead and sequence that as well from there. So, yeah, so that's kind of the first little new module that I got was the steady state gate that I really am enjoying a lot. I love the impact that it has on the sound, which I think is very cool. Something else that I've kind of kept from my performance setup in this sound design setup is keeping the Ghost on Ascend, just because I like being able to send things through it. And I'll give you an example of why here. So if I have, reset that. So if I go back and, so if I have that bass line going like this, and I wanted to add in some cool kind of harmonic content to that, I can add the Ghost. So just as an example of what you can do just by driving that one sound through Ascend for something like the Ghost. So it's a pretty sweet module that way. Yeah, so let's see, check out the chat just a little bit and see. Modular and regular synthesis seems so deep. Just bought an OP1. I'm curious to discover its sound design potential. Yeah, OP1 is an interesting one. I'm not necessarily the best person to talk to you about the OP1 because I'm not a giant fan of it. I think it has a really specific use case. I think it's for people who want to, I mean, if you are a songwriter, meaning that you like to come up with, you know, play the keys, play melodies in, do stuff like that, and not sequence things in, but you like to, you know, play piano and play chords and do stuff like that, you can come up with some ideas in that you can then use the recordings of the ideas that you've made in productions. The issue that I had with it was the sequencing was really limited with it, and that's how I tend to like to write, is with sequences, whether they're randomly generated or whether they're kind of consciously written out. And once you have created something in there, the main workflow is to use the tape workflow, so like the 4-track tape workflow. And so it was really difficult to go from using that in a sketch kind of scenario, and then transferring that into a production scenario. So for example, when I'm sketching now, what I tend to use is the Oxi One. I was using one of the Electron boxes, and before that I was using the Deluge, because with every single one of those, you can write things in the box while you're, traveling on a plane, in the bus, whatever. And then when you get back into a studio, if you wanted to use that with another instrument, with something else, it was very easy to swap from an audio track to send something out via MIDI, and you could send it out to other instruments. So what I would do, well, actually the way I do it now is I take the Oxi One with me. So like when I'm on a plane, and I will put an app on my phone. Let's see what I've got on here. I can show you my lovely music making apps. So like, for example, you could take something like the Moog Model D and take, this app, control it via Bluetooth MIDI from the Oxi One, because it has Bluetooth MIDI, and your phone and the Oxi One are both battery powered, so there's no power cables. It has Bluetooth MIDI, so there's no MIDI cable. And you can write patterns while you listen to your phone on AirPods or whatever headphones you're going to use. You can write stuff on the Oxi One, listen to it using the soft synth that you have in your phone. And then if you come up with patterns that you like, you can save them. Then when you get back into your studio, all you need to do is hold down one button and change on the dial what output that's going to. So if it was going via Bluetooth MIDI to your phone, that's one thing, and you could then swap it up and say, okay, now I want to send it out via CV to my modular, or I want to send it out via MIDI to my, Polybrute, or some other piece of gear here. And so you could really easily use those sketches in a productive workflow. So it was that's kind of how I use this, and it was my thing that I wished the Oxi One would do that, because if it would have done it, I love the form factor, I love the build quality, I think it's a beautiful machine, I think it's fun to use on its own, but I would run into this wall where I couldn't then translate those sketches into something that was more usable for me. So yeah. Anyway, let's head back over here. You can see hip hop producers taking interest in that kick. Yeah, it's really funny because, I'm obviously using it as a techno kick, But if you wanted to use this more of like an 808 style kick, you can. You can definitely do that. So yeah, it's good for all that. Good for all that stuff. Let's see here, ripping. Glad you like it. Ever use the data bender? That is on my list of modules that I want right now that I haven't been able to find a trade for. I'm trying to do a bunch of trades for modules, but yeah, the data bender is definitely on my short list. Let's see, curious to hear your approach on macro controlling CV for drops, buildups, etc. So it kind of depends. I've done that. Well, as far as controlling it via CV, I don't necessarily control it via CV. I will control audio going through effects units. So I tend to use more often than not the Octatrack as a performance mixer using the performance template. And so that way I have kind of performance controls. I just got the Oxi Meta module at Superbooth, and I'm doing some beta testing for them. And it is, it's like an extremely, extremely light version of that. So it doesn't do 95% of what the performance template does, but what it does, that 5% that it does, is some very usable things. Like it's very much the performance effects that you would find like in a DJ mixer. So if you've DJ'd before and you've used like a Pioneer DJ M900, those effects that you find in there are very similar to what's in the Oxi Meta module. And so you'll have, high pass, low pass filter, you'll have kind of these buildups, you'll have white noise, you'll have reverb, delay, things like that you can use for kind of macro control over your performance effects. And that will suffice for a lot of people. If you want to have those effects be more than just transition effects, but you want them to be actually performative and do some things, I would definitely recommend the Octatrack with the performance template. If you have the means to get an Octatrack, or if you already have one, it's definitely the way to go, because with that template you've got, or with those templates, I should say, you've got a lot of different ways that you can interact with your music. So you can do things not only like buildups and breakdowns and transitions, but you can do things that are very playable. That's one of the things I really love about that. So that's kind of generally how I control stuff. It's not via CV. I'm not big on having things kind of just press the button and have the modulators do things for me. I like that with sound design, but not at all for performance. I like to do things on my own. Hey, EasyBot, speak of the devil, we're talking about your performance template. If you just popped in, I don't know if you heard about that. But yeah, so EasyBot that's in the chat right now is the guy who came up with the performance template, and it's kind of become the standard for all of us who are doing live performance for having something you can really use and actually impact your music while you're performing, which I think is great. Any chance to see the Meta demoed? Yeah, I did a little demo of it on, I don't know if it was the last stream or the stream before, so if you look back, you'll see that, but I'll definitely do more of that. I didn't move it over to this case because it's not really, this isn't a performance case. This is a, this is a songwriting and sound design case. So yeah, let's see here. Day-O Techno streams. Yeah, I watched EasyBot's Techno stream before too, which was very cool, by the way. I love seeing people do techno. And actually, you know what I can show you? I can demonstrate what I was saying in the chat there. So if we've got, let's get our, let's grind this up a little bit. Cruising along with something like this, just break it up a little bit here. As you're cruising along with something like this, that one tone on a 5-step length is something like, let's see here. Yeah, I can do that here. I'm gonna have to patch this up really quick. Yeah, sorry, a little jam there. Yeah, let's jump back into the chat and see what everyone is chatting about. Let's see here. Appreciate the solid answer. You're welcome. Let's see. EasyBot, do you have a video that showcases different ways people approach the Octatrack? That's actually a cool idea. Interesting idea. Well, there are a couple of videos over on EasyBot's channel about how I do the Octatrack, because we did a couple of live streams together when I was out in Seattle. We on a couple of different occasions, and it was basically how I'm using my setup and my rig, my live performance rig, and that, you know, an integral part of that is the Octatrack with his template. So that's definitely a way to do it. You can check those out. Techno, yes. With the modular aspect, I've always been fascinated to discover new approaches. Yeah, that's one of the things that I stayed away from modular for a really long time, because I know myself, and I knew that I was going to get sucked into it, and just like you can see that I've obviously gotten sucked into it. But yeah, the thing that I love about it, and what really got me to really get into it, was I love synths, I love groove boxes, I love playing live, I love writing music and performing music, I love all that stuff. And I was using all of this other gear and, you know, coming up with cool creative ways to use it, for sure. But the gear was always what the gear was, you know, and it's like the Percons is going to always sound like the Percons no matter what. I mean, yeah, you could make it sound cool, and there's lots of cool things you can do with it, but it's going to be the Percons always. The filter that's on this is always going to be the filter that's on this. And the thing I love about modular is I can not only design my dream synth, but with a setup like this in particular, I can come up with my dream synth on the fly, in the moment. If I go all of a sudden, like, you know what, I would like to hear this oscillator through this filter instead of the one that it's going through, all I have to do is just repatch that. And, you know, the way that can dramatically change things, you know, let me give you an example of that just really quick. So, like with this. So with this this filter that this is going through right now, if I was to pull this out of this filter and go into the Viol Ruina filter, you can hear it's a totally different sound than if I go back over into the steady state gate. And the thing I really love with modular is that if I'm thinking while I'm writing, whether it's if I'm writing in the studio to produce something, or if I'm performing live and I'm kind of writing something on the fly, if I get an idea of something that I'd like to hear, I know how those two filters sound different from one another, so I can just patch from one to the other and bring in something, and it'll sound totally different. You know, if I was to bring in, you know, I just would change the octave on something and switch it to a different filter, and it's like I have a totally different instrument. And that, for me, is one of the amazing things with modular. I love being able to create something new all the time. And you get that a bit with the Electron boxes, and that's, I think, one of the reasons why I love them so much, because you can really work quickly in them. You can do a whole bunch of stuff with them, and you can really change the sound of them a lot. But there's still a certain amount of limitations. You know, some of those are going away. You know, like the Digitech used to have one filter set, and now there's a whole bunch of filter sets. So that's kind of like getting into this territory. We can switch up, like, oh, I want to use a comb filter now. Oh, I want to use a steeper filter or a not so steep filter. So there's all kinds of things you can do with those. The thing with modular, I feel like, is that it's just a lot more direct. I love the hands-on aspect of it. One thing that you'll notice if you can see my setup, I know it's not super clear because it's a little dark in here, but when you look at the setup, you won't see really any screens. Like the only screen is on the Pam's workout over here, and I have a couple of modules that will have screens. I'm gonna get Mordax data in here just to be able to see waveforms, especially for demonstration purposes. And then I want to get the Chaos Zadar, however you say it, and that has a screen. But for the most part, none of these modules have screens. They're all very much hands-on. So if you want to do something, you reach for it and it's right there. You don't have to go to a screen and look at something or switch to a different page or go to a different menu. And I really love that immediacy. Now, this can probably do it. Well, it does different stuff than any of the groove boxes, particularly the Electron ones. There's things that they can do a lot more of than this can. You're limited to the number of modules that you have, but then there's things that this can do that can't do. You know, it's not possible to, you know, cross-modulate on one oscillator to another oscillator that's a totally different type of oscillator. Like there's FM, but it's not, you know, you can't say, oh, I want to hear what it would sound like if this wavetable oscillator was cross-modulating this FM oscillator, and then the output of that was going into the FM of an analog oscillator. And you can do that here, and you can't do that in the boxes. So, you know, everybody has their preferred workflow, and the thing with modular for me is that it's a way to design a preferred workflow and a preferred sound. So I think it's pretty fun. Let's see here. You took apart your performance case. Yes, I did. It's sitting over there. The only thing left in it is the Oxi Meta and a PAMS and the Oxi pipe, which I'm actually going to move over here. But yeah, I don't have gigs coming up for about another month, and so everything's going to be focused on this stuff for that time. And then I'll probably rebuild the case exactly the same way because I really kind of had it dialed in the way I like it. But I may not. Who knows? Maybe I fall in love with one of these modules that's because of the way that I'm using it now, and it makes me want to set something up totally differently. I have to say, I'm really loving the steady state gate. I think it's an amazing sound, and it may find its way into my case. We'll see if I can spare the space. I may have to pull something else out to make it happen. But yeah, let's see here. The kick module is pretty sick. It is. It's super sick. I can't get enough of it. Yes. Let's see here. Hello from Texas. Oh, hey, Ed. Ed's jumping on there. Ed is one of the Patreons who we had a great chat this morning with the Patreon group that we get together on Saturdays. Yeah. Is modular on par with high-end synths? Well, on par. How do you mean on par? So you can make a modular, in my personal opinion, you could make a modular that sounds better than any synth ever, because you can customize it to whatever sound you want. There's certain things that are way more difficult to do with modular than they are with kind of fixed format synths, like polyphonic synths. It's really difficult to do a lot of voices of polyphony unless you have a module that is a polyphonic module. But to do that, to have multiple oscillators and things like that, and to coordinate that can be a real challenge in modular. So if you're looking for a polyphonic synth that you're going to play with a keyboard, I would say stick with the big guns in that world. You know, get a Polybrute or the Polybrute 2. Is it Polybrute 2? Whatever the new Polybrute is that just came out. Polybrute 12, sorry, yeah, because it's a 12 voice one. So yeah, I mean, I would stick to something like the Polybrute or the Moog 1 or something like that if you're looking for polyphony. As far as creating cool sounds and unique sounds and flexibility and things like that, I would prefer modular to pretty much any synth that's out there. So it's just, I think it's a personal preference thing too, because there's certain sounds that we get really attached to. Like there's people that love the sound of a Juno 106, and there's people that love the sound of a Moog Model D, or they love the sound of a Prophet. And you know, if that's the sound you're going for, you should absolutely get that synth and not a modular setup. But if you're looking to create your own sound and create something unique to you, I would say that modular is definitely a super fun way to go. And again, that's why this case exists. That's why I was creating this, is because starting to fire back up a whole bunch of productions for some deadlines that I have coming up. I wanted to have a completely new and never heard before by anyone sound palette. And so I'm going to be creating a lot of the kind of signature sounds of tracks that I'm writing here in the modular case and recording that into Ableton, rather than trying to use a soft synth that everybody has, trying to use a regular synth, a desktop or a Groovebox or whatever that everybody has, and spending, you know, days trying to make those same sounds that everyone else is using sound different. Where here, every sound I make is unique, because nobody's ever going to patch something in exactly the same way that I did, with the exact combination of modules and the exact type of sequence and the exact, you know, movements of faders. So all of that stuff will be unique no matter what. So yeah, and then on par with high-end synths, if you mean cost-wise, I think depending on the modular, it can be a lot more expensive than high-end synths. Modular is really deceptive. Somebody said recently, and it made me laugh a lot, that getting into modular cost-wise is like going to a tapas restaurant or to a sushi restaurant, where things are deceptively cheap, and then you start getting more and more and more, and you start piling them on, and before you know it, you've spent a few $100s, and you're only, you know, ordering things that are $6, $7, $8 each, but you get a whole bunch of them to share with your group, and all of a sudden you spend a whole bunch of money. Modular is kind of the same way. Like, I've got modules in here, I've got like multiples in here that are like $25, and then there's, you know, modules that are 100 or 200 or 500 or whatever. But it's not like going out and spending, you know, $5,000 on a synth, but before you know it, you've spent $5,000 on a modular, and it just happens much quicker. It happens much slower when you do it this way, because you're just doing it piece by piece rather than spending everything all at once. So it kind of depends. Let's see here. Modular is GOAT tier. Sounds and price. Yeah, I mean, I love the sounds for sure. Zadar is cheat code for ambient. Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that there's a lot of ambient people that really like it. I haven't done a ton of ambient music, but who knows? You know, it's one of the cool things about modular is you can just flip a switch, things sound totally different. So maybe I'll go down that road sometime. If you guys have any more questions, happy to answer them in the chat. Go ahead and chuck them in there. Sorry, Matthew, I don't have my soda water. I have my Club Mate, which I got addicted to in Germany. And then I found out here in the States, they sell it at World Market. So I go there all the time and get it. And my fridge here in my studio is stocked with it all the time because I love it. So yeah, let's, I want to mess around just a little bit more with, see what we can do with just changing up the sequence a little bit with the same stuff that we were just listening to before. So change up the bass line a little. All right, jamming it out. You have me, you hear that sound, by the way? That's the Ghost. If anybody's ever, I've heard people talk about how loud the Ghost is. That's how loud the Ghost is. There's nothing going into it right now. That's just it. It's just playing the filter on the noise that comes out of the Ghost. So yeah, turn it off. Yeah, it's very, 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 very loud. All right, let's jump back into the thing here. Circo ambient improvised jams. Yeah, maybe I should try that sometime. I mean, if EasyBot can jump into the techno pool, maybe I should jump into the ambient pool. See how that goes. Just using the Ghost for effects. Yes. As opposed to what? What else would I use the Ghost for? Because it is an effects module. But if you have another way to use it, let me know, because I love the module and would love to use it in every possible way that I can. So if you've got another way to use it, I would love to. Let's see here. Carry over from Easy Stream. Do you program sounds on the 5 and 13 steps for Techno? Yes, so it's pretty funny because I mentioned that on his stream today because he was looking for like stuff to do next. And Techno can get, so there's this really fine line, and for me personally, and this is just a personal opinion, but something that really differentiates lame techno from really good techno is there's this fine line between boring and repetitive and hypnotic. And on the hypnotic side, it's something that is repetitive in a way that it hypnotizes you and it sucks you in and it gets you, you know, you can listen to it for hours and hours and hours and hours without ever getting sick of it. On the flip side, if you don't have those hypnotic elements, it tends to be really boring. And so if you just stick to like 4 on the floor kick and offbeat hi-hats and, you know, 16th note patterns or 16 note patterns or 8 note patterns, and you don't really deviate from that very much, it can get dull. And so you end up having to try to use effects or, you know, overdo the drama in order to make it sound interesting, in order to make it fun for the listener. And one of the easiest ways that I've found is by using, I always forget if it's polymetric or polyrhythmic, but patterns that are different lengths, because what you do then is you have things that are constantly coming in and out of sync. And so it makes things really interesting. So if you have, you know, let's see, I can patch up really quick a sound here. We can do. Let's see here. Trigger. I'm almost out of patch cables around my neck, but I've got dozens and dozens of them around here. Okay, so here we can set up something kind of cool on the, take out all those drum sounds. So let's say you've got a kick pattern and you've got something that is on an offbeat. So this done. And we could make this let's just keep it on the offbeat, just to keep it interesting. So if you're cruising along with something like this, right, you can do this for a long time and it actually gets really boring and really monotonous really quick. But I've got another pattern set up over here where I've got one single note that's playing on a 5-step length pattern, and it's just a quick blip. It's what you were listening to before. I had a couple notes, but I just pulled one of them out. So if you've got one note, you can get to So with something like this, when you've got one thing that's repeating every 5 steps and all the other things that are on, you know, one note per beat, whether it's on the on beat or the off beat, this adds interest because you're constantly shifting in and out of sync with each other. Again, not the most interesting thing in the world, but by just having that one piece that's repeating on a different on a different time than all of the others, it gives you something that is like, as the listener, our brain subconsciously is trying to sync those things up, sync those patterns up in our head as we're dancing. So we've got this kind of 4 on the floor beat that's keeping us dancing, that's keeping us moving along, and that's kind of got us into a groove. But our mind is subconsciously trying to link those things up. So anytime they're not aligned, it creates tension. And then as soon as they resolve, as soon as they do line up on that one time every however many, depending on the length of the pattern, then it kind of resolves it in our mind, and that's the release of tension. And then you build up tension again until it resolves again. So it's a way to do it without having to resort to throwing a whole bunch of sounds at it and a bunch of effects and stutter this and sweeps and, you know, big washes and add in a bunch of delay. And you know, you don't need to be overly dramatic. And a lot of times the best techno in my mind is stuff that's very stripped back, and it only has very few elements. It was one of the things that I noticed when I was in Berlin, and I would go to the clubs and listen to people playing the kind of techno that I really love. And very rarely does a song have more than, you know, including the drums, maybe, you know, 5 to 7 elements total. And it's very rare. And it brings me back to something that somebody told me a long time ago, that they were saying, before you add something new into what you're writing, into the music that you're writing, before you add a new element, ask yourself, am I adding this element because it needs it? Or am I adding this element because the elements that I already have aren't good enough? And if that's the case, go back and rework the sound design or the rhythm or the melody or whatever of the elements you already have, rather than trying to make up for lame elements by throwing something else at it. And that way you can keep your tracks down to, you know, if you're gonna write techno, I mean, you want to keep yourself to, you know, I don't know, I would say 8 things maximum. Because when you get past that, it gets really cluttered and it becomes kind of frenetic, and it's not the groove that people want when they're going to a techno show. They want something that's gonna kind of lock them in and hypnotize them. And otherwise it gets kind of into the range of other types of techno-ish music. But kind of one of the hallmarks of classic techno is that it's very hypnotic and groovy without being busy and without being kind of over the top obnoxious. That gets into other genres of music that are, most of them, based on techno, but they're not necessarily techno. So it's a piece of advice: try to keep things to a really minimum number of elements, and make those elements the best that they can possibly be, rather than just chucking more stuff in there. So let's see here. What do we have? We've arrived in the adjacent galaxy. Don't forget to thank Serco, your pilot, on your way out. Yeah, thanks. Glad you're digging the voyage. Actually, actually seeing if I have more effects modules or plan on it. Let me see here. I'm not sure what that was too. One note Euclidean is a great tip. Yeah, I mean, it's the single note thing. It's a trick that I learned a long time ago to add dramatic interest without cluttering up your song. You know, again, if you listen to my music, and EasyBot will vouch for this, we talk about this a lot. I don't have a lot of melody in what I do. There are tonal things and there are bass lines that will have a few notes, but there's very rarely kind of melodies and chord changes and things like that. So for me, I would never have more than two kind of tonal melodic elements in anything going on at the same time. And one of the cool things with doing these kind of single note hits that are on different times is it's something that you can put in that's tonal, that doesn't add a whole other counter melody or other thing that's going to busy up your music. And that way it'll keep it really simple. Something else that that I talk with people about a lot, I don't use polysynths very often. I'm much more of a monosynth kind of person. And one of the things, again, that I really love in some of my favorite techno music is that just because somebody doesn't have a polyphonic voice in their song or in their performance doesn't mean they don't have chords. But what they'll have is they'll use an individual note from one synth on one note, and then they'll have a note or two on a separate note from a different synth, and a note or two on a separate note from another synth. And those three notes together from three totally different sounding voices may be the notes of a chord, but they aren't being played all in one voice like one chord. And what that does in the type of music that I make is it gives you melodic content, it gives you chords without ever playing a chord. And you don't have to be too obvious and logical about it. It's not that I'm going to play this triad on this keyboard and it's going to all sound the same so that you know that it goes together. That's kind of the dumbed down version of playing a chord. For me, the way that I like it is to make it a bit more interesting and have the three notes of the triad each played by a different instrument and not played at the same time. So it's more like you would strum a guitar and you don't get all the notes of the chord being played at the same time if you slowly strum a guitar. Well, with this, you might have those notes play sporadically throughout, and you're still getting a chord, you're still getting a key, you're still getting a melody, but you're not getting it in the kind of obvious way that you would do in a lot of music. And so that for me is something that's really, really important for the kind of techno music that I really like. So just to give you a quick example of that while you're all here. So if we've got, I'm going to shorten that up so I'm not getting the second note there. Okay, that should work a little bit. Still going to get that, but anyway, and then we can add in something else. So I'm going to add in from that bass voice that we had before. And I'm going to just clear all these out here. There we go. I'm going to take some of those out. of change up the length of that one as well. Start them together so they go together a little better. So now you've got 3 notes that are playing that are all making up a chord. Right? I'm not sure what chord it is, doesn't really matter, but they're all making up a chord, but they're not being played in the obvious way. They're not being played in the kind of cliche way of here I'm going to play a chord. So with something like this, you can have all of these things going. You've got interesting things happening, much more so than if you were to just play like chord, 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 and you've still got that same kind of structure of notes, so you're still creating that same key. But now when you add a kick to this, so you've got something that's evolving and changing and constantly kind of coming in and out of sync with one another. So you really still only have 3 notes and a kick drum. And those 3 notes, if you wanted to have it be really basic and really obvious, those 3 notes could come from a chord. Or you can have those notes each come from a different instrument, still create a key, still create that same thing. But at the same time, you've got all that interest of all the different timings of each pattern, so that they're coming in and out of sync of one another, rather than just chord, 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 chord. And the key to this is to not have too many of those things that are kind of coming in and out of sync with one another. So keep just a few elements, maximum 3, I would say, that are off of the kind of that basic tempo, and then have everything else kind of go along with the basic tempo. So right now we've got a kick drum on the downbeat, we've got a hi-hat on the offbeat, we can bring in some 16th hi-hats. And so this kind of chugs along. And then with this, you can kind of move in and out the sounds of this with filters. You can change up tunings on these, and it's like if you have a key change. And then, like we were talking about before, then you've got effects that you can add in. Adding in things like the ghosts. It's important to remember that what you're listening to right now is 3 tones, a kick drum, and a hi-hat. And those tones are going through an effects processor. But this doesn't have to be 25 different sounds, right? And again, if we want some diversity in this, we can change up the effects. If we want it to be kind of slow, sweeping changes. We can change up sounds, individual sounds. So yeah, so there you go. So again, every single thing that I was just playing there was all 3 sounds, a kick drum, and a hi-hat. And then I brought in a little percussion at one point. But other than that, again, keeping it simple. At its very most, there were 7 things going on, including the drums. And being able to keep each one of those elements as simple as possible. So again, if I just play this again. That was one element. That was another element. This was another one. And then we had a kick drum and a hi-hat and a couple of percussions. And that was it. But when they play together, they're bigger than the sum of the parts. And I think that for me is the hallmark of really good techno, is that you can strip it back to just the bare minimum of things that it takes to convey the emotion that you're trying to convey without having to just pile it on. There's a lot of music that does better when you pile it on, and for me, techno is not necessarily one of those. This is one of those ones where it benefits from this vibe. So that's 4 elements. The 3 melodic tones that we had, kind of creating the key, and then just the kick drum, right? And then add whatever percussions you want. Another kind of rule of thumb that I like is if you bring something in, take something out. So you're not just piling things on top of one another. So I pulled out the offbeat open hat, brought in the closed hat. And sometimes I'll bring out the closed hat when I bring back in the kick, just so that I can keep it really simple. Because you don't always need all the elements, right? This way, your mind can focus on those melodic elements and how they're kind of swirling around, and your mind will be trying to line them up and trying to find those patterns while your body's kind of grooving to the 4-on-the-floor kick, right? And there's this cool thing there's this cool musical term that I love from classical music that's called ostinato, and it's this thing where if something that is not a rhythmical pattern repeats enough times, your mind will make it a rhythm, will make it fit with what you're doing. So with these things, if you've got something that's playing that's repeating every 16 steps, and you've got something that's repeating every 5 steps, they're only going to line up every once in a while. I don't know the math off the top of my head. I'm sure somebody on the stream does, but they'll only line up the same every once in a while. And your mind will find those patterns, and it will remember subconsciously when that's coming up next, and your mind will feel that tension, and then it'll release when they line up that one time. And so your mind will start to find those patterns, even if they're, 15, 20, 30 bars long, depending on how long the pattern is that it needs to repeat. It's also one of the reasons why in techno, again, me personally, you will never hear me say there's one way to do techno. This is all my opinion. This is what I prefer. There's no rules in techno. You can do however you want. But what I personally like is when the patterns are relatively short. So I generally tend to keep my patterns a maximum of 16 steps because I like to have those things that are hypnotically repeating over and over again. But where I get the variation so that it doesn't become boring is by having different ones of different lengths. So like we have here, that we've got one that's 5 steps, we have one that's 10 steps, we have one that's 16 steps of those melodic sections. And so you're getting the 3 different notes. All playing off of each other. So they're all repeating at different lengths, right? So this one is 5, this one is 10, and this one is 16. So these two will line up every 2 times, right? So every 2 times through the 5, it'll line up with the 10. So there's a certain amount of pattern recognition in there subconsciously, but then when you add in the one that's going every 16, you kind of lose that. And so this is where your mind kind of gets sucked in, and it makes you subconsciously pay attention and be interested in the music, even if it's only 3 tones that are being really, really repetitive, you know. And then you add in the kicks and hats and things like that to make it sound more dancey and more hypnotic. And again, with just these 3 notes, to add interest, that's where I bring in the effects, and that's why I love the ghost. But it's not always the ghost, but the key. So what the ghost basically is, the way that I'm using it is, it's a delay, a reverb, a distortion, and a filter. And so the key parts of it for adding interest are the delay and reverb. So the distortion is just giving character to whatever's going through it and kind of making it gritty and grimy. But the key is the delay and the reverb, so that you've got, not only do you have the repetition of something repeating every 5 or every 10 or every 16 steps, but then you also have a delay that's causing intermittent repeats that are between those, that are all on the same time because they're all going through the same delay. So even though they're repeating at different levels or at different times, they're going through a delay that's keeping them same in a certain way. So again, just to listen to that. So that's going through the delay and the reverb of the ghost. The only thing that I add on to that is the filter, because it's a resonant filter. There's a peak and you can control the resonance, and I tend to turn it up pretty high because I like to sweep that filter and have that peak pick out certain harmonics that will then jump out from these sounds that are already there, and it makes it sound like a new synth comes in. So listen as I sweep this really slowly. You see it's picking out different harmonics, and it sounds like another synth came in. It sounds like another voice came in, but it's not another voice. It's just the harmonics that already exist within those notes. And you hear the delay. So even though the things are all at a different time, it's finding another pattern in that your mind can kind of lock onto. And then again, you add in a kick to it. Give you, this is where it gets hypnotic, and this is the kind of techno that I love. And then to add in energy, that's when you would add in things like percussion or hi-hats or open up decays. That's another way to add energy. Open up filters can add energy. So let's say we take out the kick, but we open up the filter. Build up energy, and then to drop back in, we'll close back off these filters when we drop back into the kick again. And this is a way also that techno really differs from styles of music like EDM, for example. In EDM, you'll have a breakdown where you'll build and build and build and build, and then after the build, you'll have a big climax of a drop where everything comes in, all the sounds come in, whereas techno tends to be the opposite. You'll have those things during the breakdown that'll build up, right? Maybe they're gonna build up. And then when they drop, things will drop out rather than adding in. And it'll kind of drop back into its groove rather than throwing more at it and having it be an even bigger thing. Cool. So there's a little bit of my techno music theory. And again, take all this with a grain of salt. The best thing about techno is that there's no rules. It's not like, other genres where you kind of have to have a certain structure. It's not like pop music where there's like bridge, chorus, bridge, everything kind of goes A, B, A, C, like there's certain formulas. With techno, there's not a formula. There's things that you can do as kind of tools and tricks to elicit certain responses, certain emotions and things like that. But it's not that it's like, this is the way to do it, you got to do it this way. There's none of that. I would say the only thing that, rules wise is try to avoid the other rules. Try to avoid the rules from other genres and just make it what it is. Make it techno, keep it underground, keep it, creative and cutting edge. As Jeff Mills says, keep it music made with sounds from the future. That's kind of what techno is. It's not a formula. It's not a pattern. There are certain formulaic things that are popular right now, and I think a lot of my favorite techno artists tend to try to avoid those like the plague, because they don't want it to sound like what everybody else sounds like. They want it to sound like its own thing, and they want it to have its own kind of creative voice rather than just being kind of a regurgitation of what other people are doing. So yeah, so that's my soapbox about techno. As I said when I was on Matthew's stream, that techno is the punk of electronic music. It's the thing where there's no rules. Like, do your own thing. And there's only one rule, and that rule is, if it sounds good to you, it is good. That's it. Who gives a shit what anybody else thinks? Who cares what their opinion is? It only matters if it sounds good to you. If it sounds good to you, cool, it is good. That's the way it should be. It's very much the Rick Rubin school of music. Like the listener doesn't matter. This is an exercise of making music for the maker. And if people like it in the end, that's awesome. That's really super cool, and I think it's amazing. And I love when people like my music. But I'm not making music so that people will like it. I'm not making music so that they'll go, oh, that sounds like so-and-so, or that sounds like this other act. I would rather they said, man, I've never heard anything like that, and I loved it. So that's kind of the reaction that I'm always going for. So let's see, if there's any other questions, pop them into the chat. This is kind of my way to hang out on Saturday night and not do anything else. So let's see here. Elegant, I like it. Thanks for describing my music as elegant. That's very kind. Or muy elegante. Sorry, I'm coming in late. Was at an In Real Live show with Jazz. Jazz is fish. Interesting. A jazz jam band, I'm assuming. How are you using the Oxi One versus the WMD sequencer, the Metron? So Metron, I'm actually sequencing everything from the Metron right now just because I only just connected the Oxi One tonight. I only set up this system yesterday and turned it on for the first time yesterday, so I'm still just kind of screwing around with stuff. And I just live patched all of this. We unpatched everything and patched everything again live on the stream just so you can kind of see how that works. But everything's being sequenced from the Metron right now, and that's not for any reason other than I just connected the Oxi and I've been using the Metron, you know, in this setup just cause. But I will be using the Oxi to sequence a lot of melodic stuff. But as you can see, the Metron is really good for even sequencing melodic stuff in a techno standpoint, because you're not really, like I was saying before, you're not really sequencing, you know, melodies and counter melodies and chords and things like that. So it doesn't have to be in a certain key. It doesn't have to be like that. So because of that, the Metron's really good for creating this kind of techno. Where the Oxi, where I like the Oxi is that it keeps things in key so that I can use things like vocals or samples that are in a certain key. I like to be able to do that. But right now, these oscillators aren't even tuned. I was just like messing around, tuning them as I go by ear to make it sound like something that I wanted to hear. So, when you're doing that and you're not trying to sync it with anything else that's in a certain key, it doesn't really matter as long as it sounds good together. You know, it goes back to that kind of techno rule of if it sounds good, it is good. So that's why I use the Oxi One in my performance setup, and it's less important in this setup, although it will become more important as I start using this really for production, which I'll be doing starting coming up next weekend. And that's because I will be using this to record parts into Ableton that will be pieces and parts of songs, and they'll need to go with other things. So they will need to be in key and that kind of stuff. Especially for things like remixes and stuff like that, it's really important that you are using things that are pieces and parts from the originals in remixes. So let's see. I have Syntact. I'm assuming that's what you mean by ST. I'm having Syntact, but I don't find myself using it as much lately. Got myself an MC707 and love it. To sequence it in an Electron style, could the Syntact play that role, or would the Digitact 2 be better? So, yeah. So the MC707 is an amazing machine with a really difficult workflow. So if you can find a way to sequence it from an Electron box, I think you would get the best of both worlds. You could get the really good high quality Roland sounds without having to suffer the hostile Roland workflow and be able to use the Electron workflow. So yes, you could. And if it's a matter of sequencing from the Syntact or the Digitact, it's going to be exactly the same. Honestly, particularly Syntact and Digitact 2, because what you can do, and we were talking a little bit earlier about the OP1 and how it doesn't lend itself to sketching and then flipping to other stuff. In either the Syntact or the Digitact 2, you can write things in those synth engines, and then you can flip that audio track to a MIDI track and send it to another device. So you could have the ease of workflow, even though you don't have the best sounds, maybe if it's not the sound you're looking for. I happen to really love them, but if it's not the sound you're looking for, you can then flip it to the MC707 and use the Roland sounds. And so you'd be able to sketch in a workflow that lends itself more to sketching, and then flip it to the sounds that you want. And I've used these machines like that for a very long time. It used to be in the Digitact, you would have to write it in audio and then copy that pattern over to a MIDI pattern and then send it out to MIDI. Now that you can just flip it from an audio track to a MIDI track, it just makes it that much easier. And when the Syntact came out, I loved that aspect of the Syntact immediately. So yeah, either way, either one is going to be the same, and I see where you're going with it, and I would do the same thing. That way you have the good workflow and the good sounds. Let's see here. Would you add on other Euro effects modules? So I have a few others. So, and again, mostly for sound design. So this setup is really a sound design setup. So I have the Ghost, and then I also have the Erica Synth's dual effects right next to it. Then I have two of, oops, I think I just had a battery die. Let me plug this back in again. I have two of the Happy Nerding effects aids, the XLs. So each one of them is 2 channels, so that gives you basically 4 more effects. So you've got 2 in the dual effects and then 4 more there, so you've got 6 individual assignable effects. Then next to that I have the WMD Geiger counter, which is a great kind of distortion, overdrive, grimy module full of craziness. And so yeah, so that one is another effects module. Then I'm getting, I have arriving next week a Qubit Prism, because I wanted to be able to have, again, some more interesting delays, because you'll notice that I like to use really simple tones and then mess with them with delays. And it's funny because you were mentioning ambient music before, and I'm sure if you're watching this channel, you probably watch Ura's channel as well. He's an amazing person, amazing musician, the nicest guy in the whole world. And I love watching his channel, even though our music is really super different, because a lot of the techniques that he uses in his kind of ambient dub with using really simple notes, but then changing the timing of those notes with delays and then adding reverbs and things like that to make them more complex is very much the way I write, even though it's a different style of music. And so, you know, I'll be using, you know, less of the kind of pretty delays and reverbs and more of the kind of distortions and overdrives and bit crushers and, you know, complex delays and things like that. But the end result is kind of the same. It's the idea is to use the simplest possible notes and tones to convey what you're trying to convey, and then use all these great electronic tools that we have in order to kind of fill them out and make them more, you know, interesting and dynamic and evolving and things like that, rather than going in and saying, I'm going to write a really complex melody with a really complex counter melody with a chord pad in the background that's in the right key with a bass line that matches that, and you've got a ton of things going on. And that's one way to write. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I'm saying that that's not my style. I prefer to keep things really super simple and use as little as possible to convey the message I'm trying to convey. And so that's why I use these effects, and I will have some others as well. One of the modules that I have coming as well is a Dopefer. It's basically a mix matrix, so I can plug voices into it, and then I can have those as basically 4 different sends to go to different effects, and I can dial in which things are going to which effects instead of just using the aux sends from the mixer, because I can only use 1 at a time from this mixer until they have the new WMD mixer, and then I'll be able to use 2 at a time. But with this one, I can only use 1. So again, building the custom setup, right? Like that's the whole idea for me about doing modular, is building the synth that you want to play. And when you say like, oh, I wish I could do this, well, you can't. You just make it. You configure the modules in a certain way that does that. So yeah, let's see here. Do you have other samples on the DTAC 2 besides drum kit? So yes, but very few, again, because I try to keep it as kind of minimal as possible. So my drum kits on the DTAC are always the same. So one's always a kick, which now I'm using the kick over here, so I'm never even unmuting one. 9 is the rumble that goes with that kick, so I get, right? 2 is always a clap or snare or something that goes on that rhythm. 3 and 4 are always percussion. 5 is always a 16th hi-hat. 6 is always an open hi-hat. And then 7 and 8 are other samples. 7 is generally an atmosphere. So you hear it's like, it's a texture, an atmosphere that's playing in the background, a lot of times atonal. I have a whole collection of these that are, you know, some of them are like field recordings of different things. Some of my favorite ones are like field recordings like in a train station, and you just hear like people and rumble of trains and stuff like that, and you can put those in the background of your music, and it adds a really cool dramatic kind of organic layer to it without, again, having to add other instruments and other melodies and other lines to kind of over clutter and overcomplicate it. And then 8 is always another longer sample as well, and I don't remember what I have on this one. Let's see when it comes back around. Okay, so it's like dubby chords. Sometimes I generally put on track 8, I generally put vocals. So let's see. I think this is a vocal on this one. Oh no, there's percussion. Back here. Yeah, so this one was a vocal. So yeah, so those are the kind of samples that I have on there. Then on the other tracks down here, right now I just have a few like kind of percussive samples. And again, most of these are atmospheres, backgrounds, things like that, because again, I don't want to put in a sample that's a melody, or put in like something that's too obvious, like put in a chord stab and then sequence that chord stab to make a melody. That's not the kind of music that I'm making. But like this stuff gives really interesting textural background, right? And then if you bring in also, bring this one down there, background. And then you bring in one or two of those elements we were talking about before. So already you have a lot of interest without having to have anything that's too obvious, you know, anything that's too obviously melodic, you know. And again, I don't know if Matthew's still on here, but we always joke, like, you can make any noises you want and then throw in a kick and it's techno, you know. So with this gives a cool kind of background foundation, and this can go in any direction. This could get really hard, this could stay super mellow, you know, like if I brought in a more mellow kick with this could be like, bass line from before. And then our effects. So this could be really atmospheric like this. So this is almost almost ambient. We were talking about me playing ambient music. This is as close as I'm going to get for the moment to ambient. Maybe I'll do some ambient music at some time, but this is kind of ambient techno, right? This is background. It's more atmospheric. It's not super logical, but you could dance to this. And this is the kind of music that I would play if I was playing an opening set and I was kind of warming up the dance floor, just kind of getting people as they're entering a club for the first time, and I just want to get them kind of like bobbing their heads and getting out on the dance floor. This is the kind of music that I would play, and then I would build this over time. But it doesn't have to be that vague, right? I could put in a much more dramatic kick drum with this, and I can open up some of these filters. Add in some percussion. again, it's just different ways to use exactly the same stuff, but in different ways. So it's not all about like, oh, I have to have this sound, it has to go with this, it has to be a certain way. The idea is that you can use sounds like tools and have them do anything you want them to do. And that's, for me, that's the way that I improvise live, but it's also the way that I like to produce as well. And that's one of the reasons why I kind of built this case, was to be able to do more of this improvisational stuff. We were actually talking about this with some of the Patreons. We have at one of the levels of Patreon, we have a weekly Zoom call that we do together. And we were talking about this earlier today on our call, the idea that practicing improvised performance is something that's really good for your production as well, because one of the things that ends up getting in the way of a lot of producers is that they get in the weeds. So like you'll get, I mean, how many out there have gotten stuck like tweaking a hi-hat or a snare or a kick drum or whatever for hours and hours and hours and hours, and you never get anything finished. You never complete a track, you never finish anything. And so the idea of trying to get stuff done by making quick decisions and moving on to the next thing is something that you practice by doing improvised live performance. So all of this stuff that we're improvising right now, and obviously none of this is pre-prepared, certainly none of the modular stuff. I mean, some of the drum beats are, but the whole idea is that you're, by practicing making quick decisions with sound design, moving on, trying things, doing things like that, you're improving your production skills because you're avoiding going down the weeds, and getting stuck, tweaking compressor settings for hours that make absolutely no difference in the end result of your music at all, comparatively to coming up with those notes that go well together, or that groove, or that particular movement of a filter that's really going to add some dynamic change. And those are those things that you do on the fly. Those are the things that you do by doing them and messing around with them, rather than micro tweaking forever. Because again, at the end of the day, the people that are listening to your music, unless it's, and I should preface this, if you're making techno, if you're making dance music and it's club music, when people are listening to this, no one is ever out there on the dance floor enjoying themselves and all of a sudden they stop and say, oh, I can't dance to this anymore, his compression settings were way off, right? Nobody cares. The end user is they don't care that you did all those things. Obviously if you make a mess of things, they care. And if you need to fix things through mixing and mastering, yes, that's a totally different story. But don't get caught in the weeds just while you're writing. The writing process should be like a free flowing thing, and it should look very much like improvised performance. It's one of the things that EasyBot does all the time on his stream is he's writing live on his streams, but he's improvising writing. He's trying things like, what would this sound like? What would this sound like? And when you watch my streams, it's very much the same thing where like I'm making stuff up as I go, messing around with stuff, seeing what I like. And the difference is that at the end of my jam session, I just shut everything off and I don't save anything. And then I start the next jam session. And it's the same with the live performances. But with production, the only difference is that I'll be recording these and recording the jams and recording the things that I like and kind of tweaking things as I like them. And I like to record in long parts that would be like the whole length of a song, even if I'm just recording in a bass line. I want to record in all the movements and the filter movements and the changes, and I want to do those organically myself. I don't want to go in after the fact and draw in automation in Ableton, because for me, that doesn't sound like I did it. It sounds like it was written by an algorithm when you do it like that. So I like to go in and actually tweak and touch things, myself. And so, yeah, that's what this will be for. So let's see what else we have in the chat over here. I feel like oh, hey, thanks for the the boost, the bonus. I appreciate that. The super, it's the first, it says, let's celebrate my first super on a live stream. So you're the first person who's ever done a donation on a live stream. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Shout out to GearTube. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Let's see. I feel like I'm having a free masterclass on techno. It's cool to see what's cool about it from a fan's point of view. I appreciate that. It's, you know, this is by no means a masterclass. This is basically me shooting the shit about how I do this and kind of my methodology and my thoughts. And masterclasses for me are always funny, although I am putting together a course. So if you're interested in that, go to my website. You can sign up for the pre-list of the course, because it will be, we're going to keep it limited to a very few people, because there's going to be a big live aspect to it, live one-on-one aspect. So if you want to be in that first group of 20, go ahead and sign up on my website, which is circlelive.com. And there's a thing on there where you can go in to sign up for the waiting list. And I'll just take people right off there, the order that they've signed up for that first group of 20. And that'll be coming up in the next couple of weeks. We'll get that started. So yeah, so that'll be more like a masterclass. This is more like me just like yapping away on a Saturday night, enjoying my club mate. I would love, just as much as Matt, as you want to get sponsored by LaCroix or LaCroix, I want to get sponsored by Club Mate. Definitely my favorite beverage. So let's see here. Someone else had a system of scenes with 8 scenes, scene recall mode. Like we said about going into the weeds, do you think the scene model can speed songwriting? No. And I'll tell you why. So again, going back to what I was just mentioning before, for me, the thing that will speed your songwriting and that will make you better at songwriting is not having a whole bunch of things pre-prepared and not having to waste hours and hours and hours setting up scenes and pre-preparing things, but going through and just writing and experimenting. And you know, one of the things that's difficult with me, I used to have an MC707, and the reason I don't anymore is because it was difficult for me, because I would have ideas, and to make the tweaks or the changes, I had to go too deep in order to make a single change and then go to a different menu to go make a single change. Whereas with something like the Modular, I can make, you know, 2 changes at once with 2 hands or push multiple sliders or whatever. And with the Electron boxes, I've got the menus are never more than 2 layers deep. So you've got a main menu, so you just press the button and you're on that page and you've got those parameters, and you just press it a second time and you've got another page on some things. And so everything's very immediate, so I can get to everything really fast rather than having to, again, get into the weeds and start to go in and you know, feel like I'm, you know, programming a satellite in order to get the sound that I want to get out of something. So the only thing is, the scenes on the MC707 are kind of like the clips in Ableton. Which is also kind of like the setup on the 1010 black box, where you can, once you record things in, you can kind of use those scenes to jam your arrangement. And in that case, yes, it is handy to be able to do that. Although again, on the MC707 with that little screen, it's really hard to do different individual clips. You have to do scene by scene by scene and launch them like that. And so you have to set them up in advance the way you want to do them. Whereas with Ableton or with the 1010 black box, you can have a whole bunch of scenes in there, and then you can individually trigger different parts from different instruments. It doesn't have to be everything all in the same scene. So there are ways that it can help, but I don't necessarily think it would do everything that you're looking at. Let's see, you have a point, but at the show we went to, the piano initially sounded over compressed, and when the player hit a high note, it was like an ice pick to my ears until it was changed. That's weird that hitting a note would cause something to come through like that, because generally that's what a compressor would catch. Is when things go above a certain decibel level, that it stops that. So generally what you find when you find out that things are over compressed is things get deadened and not shooting through. But again, that goes back to, it's pretty rare that something like that would happen. Not saying that it would never happen, but it's pretty rare in a dance music world that happens. Let's see. Excessive compression limiting can fatigue the listener. Yes. So compression and limiting doesn't make things louder, like the loudness wars thing. What it does is it compresses down the headroom, which allows you to turn things up. So you still have to turn it up. And you can over compress without making things louder. And you can over limit without making things louder. If you don't have automatic makeup gain, you won't get that extra added volume. You'll just get compression, and it'll just squish the dynamics out of things, and it'll make things sound all monotone. You won't have highs and lows. You'll have just kind of this. I always use the analogy that it sounds like when you overcompress, it sounds like Charlie Brown's teacher from the old Peanuts cartoons, where they would just go wah 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 wah. That's what everything sounds like. There's no enunciation of the music. It's all just kind of this monotone kind of hum of stuff. Big rack, yes, the new big rack. I have a Peak that I'm used to. Yeah, Novation Peak is a great instrument. Do you think the Sequential Trigon 6 or Obi X8 would be a solid main gun analog? Yeah, maybe. Again, it all kind of depends on how you're going to use it. The Peak is one of those instruments that I love the user interface, although the menus can get a little weird. You don't have to use them very often, so I like that. And there's a lot of kind of knob per function things on the Peak, which I think is really great. It's on my list of synths I would like to get someday, but it hasn't been a priority yet. But I love that one. As far as, I don't know, main gun analog, it depends on what you want to use it for. And are you looking for something that's more of a desktop? Are you looking for a full synth with a keyboard? Are you a keyboard player? Are you looking for that? I have one polysynth in this whole room. I think only one. Yeah. Only one actual polysynth. And the reason that I have it is because it does everything that I've ever wanted to do in a polysynth. And it's an analog polysynth, and I love the sound of it. I think it sounds amazing, and I would always recommend it to people if they wanted to get one analog polysynth. And that is the Polybrute. And I have the old school one. I don't have the 12 because, again, I'm not a keyboard player. So honestly, having 12 notes of polyphony is not that important for me. I'm not playing like complex chords and moving from one complex chord set to another complex chord set, so notes are going to trip over each other. So having more basic specs in the Polybrute is fine for me. I love the Polybrute because it is analog. It does FM, which it does fantastic analog FM, so it allows you to make some really amazing sounds. I love all of the dynamic capabilities of the sound design for it. So being able to have the touch strip, the pressure pad with the XY axis, and polyphonic aftertouch, being able to have all of those things that you can build into patches to create amazing, super deep and evolving sounds, I think is really cool. And that for me is all I've ever wanted in a polysynth, even though I don't play it as much as I should. That for me is kind of the best of those worlds. So I would recommend that. But if you're looking for a desktop unit, then you might want to go with one of the others. Or if you have a certain thing like the Oberheim, it's kind of like, that has its own sound. So if you're going for that sound, definitely get that synth. If you're looking for something that can be really diverse and be kind of a jack of all trades, I don't know that I would go the Oberheim route, because it tends to be, it is what it is. And it has diversity of sound within its palette, but it has one palette. And so yeah, it depends on what you want to do. Maybe you don't need diversity of sound. Maybe you want that sound. And if that's what you want, you should definitely go that route. So let's see. I think that's it for the questions. Does anybody else have any questions out there? We've been going for a long time. I think this is my longest stream ever. And yeah, I was just going to be here on a Saturday night anyway, messing around with this new modular setup that I just turned on for the first time yesterday. So thank you guys for joining in with me. Anything else you would like to see on this case, or other questions that you have, or things that you would like to hear, definitely let me know. Pop those in the chat, and I'm happy to oblige. Just some of the stuff that we were talking about early on for anybody who joined late. The case is kind of evolving, and that's why there's blank spaces in it here. I have a couple more. I'm trying to trade for gear, so I'm not spending a ton of money to get this built up. And so I have a couple of trade synths that are coming in. I'm getting a Chaos Odessa oscillator, which is coming in tomorrow, and a Coslin, also from Chaos, which is a frequency shifter, which I'm really excited about, because again, think back to what we've been going through and the way that I kind of am doing this thing with really simple sounds and evolving them over time. Having a frequency shifter is super cool for that, because it's a way to keep something really much, keep a pattern the same, or a synth voice the same, and have it really evolve by shifting frequency rather than just having it transposed. So frequency shifting is really cool. And then what else do I have? I have a Prism that's coming, Qubit Prism, which is another really cool delay module that's going to get some more cool rhythmic delay stuff going on here. And let's see what else. Oh, along the lines of the randomness thing, I have so right here, this is the one module that's not connected. That's a quantizer, an ADDAC systems quantizer. So what I'm going to put with that is two things. One is a Turing machine, and the other one is a sample and hold with the quantizer, so that I can generate some kind of random patterns off of really simple things, and then have them quantized through the quantizer before they go into the oscillators that we have here. So that should be a lot of fun too. And then yeah, I don't know if Ed's still on here, but Ed may be trading me something else. I shot him a message about something earlier. So yeah, we'll see. I have a bunch of gear up for trade if anybody's interested in what do I have? Some other modules. I have a Dirty Wave M8. I have a Mother 32. I have, what else? I think that's kind of it. Oh, I have the Teenage Engineering, the 133, the KO2, the big, actually big, it's not very big, it's still pretty small, but like the what are those things called? Pocket operators. It's like the scaled up version of the KO pocket operator. So yeah, so if you're interested in any of those, drop me a line. I've got stuff up for trade if you've got any of the modules that I'm looking for. But yeah, in the meantime, let's jam a little bit more. I'm gonna take out the patterns that I put in here so we can just go for something totally different. So this is something that I tend to do a lot, is just kind of like randomly put patterns in. I don't know what they are, and I'll just kind of go from there. So let's see where this takes us. All right. Cool. Well, if there's not any more questions, I think I'm going to call it a night. Thank you guys very much for hanging out. I appreciate it. Feel free to reach out either in the comments or anything if you have any questions or comments. If there's anything you'd like to see for any of these streams or any of that stuff, I'm happy to do it and enjoy hanging out with you guys virtually online here. If you're interested, check out the Patreon. Got a bunch of cool people over there that have started doing things like our weekly one-on-one calls. We've got some people that are at the level where they're doing individuals one-on-one, which is great. And then we've got our weekly group calls, which is tons of fun as well. And I post some other content over there as well. But thank you guys very much for hanging out with me on this Saturday night, and hope to see you guys all again soon in the next one. Thank you.